Good morning. This is how far I've gotten on this tiny house project so far. As you can see, I've got the Tyvek on, which was definitely a chore. Got it framed in most places, except for right here on the front. I've got the windows installed and framed in. I've got the doors installed and framed in. I've installed and taped Z flashing. I'm getting ready to start the LP Smart Siding installation. I'm going to start here on the end. Let me give you a little breakdown of how this works. Okay, you frame your house, and you put a OSB sheeting on the outside of that. Then you come back, you put this Tyvek on it. A lot of different manufacturers make this stuff. It's the same thing. I got this one from Home Depot. It's a little bit cheaper than the original Tyvek brand, but it seems to be the same stuff. I found them both. What you do, you start at the bottom. This has to be shingled when it comes to this Tyvek. You can see it right here. But I've overlapped shingle effect by starting at the bottom, a minimum of 6 inches overlap. Start at the bottom, wrap the entire house, keep going all the way up. Here I had a slight pitch to the roof, so I'll have kind of a weird thing, but it's the same deal. They say every 18 inches, put in your red cap nails. Problem is, studs are 16-inch on center. So I went with 24 inches apart here. In some cases, I went a little closer, depending on where the ends of the buildings happened. So I've got this with the Tyvek slide, the Tyvek tape, to make sure that nothing can get in between there, no moisture, because this is a moisture barrier is all it is. And down here, as you can see, I've installed what's called Z flashing. The Z flashing that is taped here, when the water runs down, there's no way for it to get behind the Z flashing. It comes out, it goes over like this, and this piece of trim is not going to get water behind it. This is also going to happen when I put the LP Smart Siding on, because this wall is taller than 8 feet. LP Smart Siding is 4 foot by 8 foot sheet. So 8 foot up, I'll have LP Smart Siding going all the way across, and then a piece of Z flashing taped above that in place, and then I'll finish the rest going up. And when I put the LP Smart Siding on here, they tell you to have a 3/8 inch gap between the top of the Z flashing, this part, and the bottom of the LP Smart Siding. That prevents rot where water and stuff will get in here and sit. This was not a difficult process to do. It's the first time I've done it. What was a little bit jolting to me was actually how long it took, because I've watched a lot of YouTube videos in order to pull this off, because I've never done this before. And as anybody knows who's watching this video, a lot of YouTube videos, 5-10 minutes long, and all of a sudden, amazingly, you've got a house built in 10 minutes. It doesn't happen like that in real life. This Tyvek actually took me days because I was doing it by myself. Yes, I used all the tricks that they said on YouTube. I put it on a pole, walked around with it, stapled it in place. Try it with the wind blowing. And just after a while, your shoulders start giving you a fit because holding it up so long. Then you got to come back and put all these nails in it. Then you got to come back and tape it. And then any place you've got a little hole, I suggest you come back and put a little piece of tape over that hole so water doesn't get behind it. Another thing that was really time consuming was this trim. This trim around here is also LP Smart Siding, and it took a horrible amount of time to cut it all, put it on. I put liquid nails behind it, and in some places caulking and liquid nails. I used galvanized nails to hold it in place. In some places I use screws. And here, as you can see, I got one that's open still. I use trim screws. They're not supposed to, that will be filled in a little bit later with caulking and painted over. And this takes a long time. It's very time consuming. It actually took me weeks to do this around the windows and things of that nature. So it was a very time consuming process. So you look up here and you see a video that's doing it in a couple minutes. Do not be deceived. And as far as projects go, individual steps that were deceptively time consuming when I started this was indeed the LP Smart Siding trim and this Tyvek. Okay, I'm about to start the installation of the LP Smart Siding, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay. Got one thing I want to touch bases on here. This LP Smart Siding is made in such a way where it has grooves in it. So every 16 inches, you got to drive in a galvanized nail. It has to be galvanized because it's got to endure the weather here without rusting. But here's the question. I've got studs in behind here every 16 inches. Then I got OSB board on top of the studs, and I have this Tyvek. So how do I know where my studs are to make sure I line this LP Smart Siding up correctly all the way down the house? How am I going to do this? Well, what I did is ahead of time, I marked where my studs were at. I just used a finishing nail right here. I mean a roofing nail. One there, there. Every 16 inches, I have one of those nails. If I have to, I'll take a string and run it all the way up. You can't see them, but I have markers up there as well to let me know where the 16-inch centers of these studs are. Okay, so back here, got my first 16-inch center. But from here to the edge of this trim is 10 inches. It's not 16 inches. So I had to cut the board ahead of time so I can know exactly the size I needed here for it to line up. And this is what I did here. I took 10 inches off of this board, 10 inches off the end here. Now you have two ends. You have an underlap, and on this side you have an overlap. As you can see here, different there than there. Okay, so you have to make sure you take the right end off, because your next board's going to come along and lay right on top of this. Okay, you're going to nail into this and then all the way through both of them. So I had to cut this board. Now, this LP Smart Siding is pretty amazing stuff. It's guaranteed for like 50 years. Okay, it's just compressed composite board here. Show you the back. And it's primed ahead of time. Now, when I cut it, the primer edge was lost. So I took this. I'm not doing product endorsements for anybody. I'm just telling you what I do. And I primed the edge of this right when I cut it. Because if I don't, the elements will get to that. And this will start destroying on me There'll be no warranty or anything if I don't do this. So now I have this board, the proper length, to where my first 16-inch center comes right here. 8 inches, and then the 16th inch is right here. So the nail will go in the center there, and then my next stud will line up with this right here. There's this little bead on here to help you line these up, and the board will come right up to this bead. And that way, this little gap will be the same as these rest of these gaps all the way down. All right, I'm going to let this primer dry for a minute, and then we'll get to the next step. It looks like I have the first piece of smart siding installed. You can see this is the primed edge that I have, and you can see that I've got a gap in here. It's pretty close to 3/16, and that's what the people from the LP Smart Siding say, and that has to be caulked. I use Quad Max caulking. It's outdoor caulking, durable stuff. That's what they say to use. And the reason they say to put this 3/16 inch gap right here is due to expansion that happens over time. So I suggest you follow suit as well. Now, as you can see here, in this particular area, I had to put the nails on top of the smart siding and not in the gap like on every 16-inch that I did here. Okay, and the reason I did that is because this was the end piece that I had to cut, and it was an eccentric length, and there was a stud right there behind it. So I'll paint over that. I'll put a little bit of caulking where anything is a little countersunk. And you're supposed to adjust these nails to where, and I am using a nail gun, you're supposed to adjust that to where it just comes flush. If you go too, and I'm pretty much got it flush right there. If you go too deep, they tell you to caulk it in and put another one. If you are extending out past the surface, they tell you to hammer it in flush. Now, as you can see here, I've got my gap underneath there, and the way I kept that consistent is I took this piece of OSB board I had, I clamped it into place right here, and now I'm getting ready to put the second sheet on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it right on there. It'll be a consistent length. I hold it into place with one hand, and I sink a nail or two to make sure this doesn't go, and then I get that out from underneath it. It's going to be a tight fit because the weight of the board is going to be on it. Now, this is overkill, but I will kill everything. I lay a piece of board down here because I don't want the LP Smart Siding to come in contact with the ground. I don't want to get any excess dirt, moisture, or anything like it, or more importantly, something sharp down there, plus the edge of the primer on the smart siding, and eventually, especially in that area where water is liable to settle, I don't want to have a problem later. So I will come back in a little while, make sure all these nails are driven flush, and I will get the second piece up here. And if you take your time and do all the steps, so far it's gone surprisingly problem-free, but it's not over. So let me get the next one up. I've got the second sheet installed now. Another learning experience here. You can see where I had to trim the bottom off just a little bit, but not the full bottom, and I'll explain why. When I started putting these sheets up, it's important to keep this gap consistent all the way up. Okay, I got it relatively consistent here, but when I first set the sheet in place, I realized that at the bottom I had the gap where it should be, but the top was a little wider. And that's from the house being maybe 16th inch, 1/8 inch out of square from top to bottom. And I'll be honest with you, my first time building a house, and it seemed like to have it out of square 16th inch or an 1/8 was a blessing. So I'm grateful for the problems I am experiencing opposed to the ones I'm not. So what I did to compensate for that is I cut down here about an 1/8 inch off. And I took it to this end and cut a triangle out of it. So down here, I really didn't cut anything off. I may have shaved the edge with the blade, but I took this and cut an 1/8 inch off this side in a wedge shape. I primed the whole thing just because, where I knocked the primer loose. And when I did that, I could keep the bottom consistency going across here, and this will shift over by itself. Now, indeed, there may be a little bit of imperfection at the top, but what's going to happen up at the top, it's going to be completely hidden by more of this Z flashing that's going to overlay the top of that. So any imperfections that you have, you want them up at the top because it's going to get covered anyway. And then that way, everything will maintain a consistent gap everywhere. I've got my last piece cut at 45 1/16 inch wide, and it's over here drying. I've primed it, and we're going to be applying that last sheet as far as this bottom row next. All right, I'm to the point to where I've got the 3 sheets that are going to be on the bottom of this wall up. Okay, as you'll notice across the top, the roof is sloped, so it's left me to a point where I'm going to have to cut 3 pieces to fit up there, and I'm going to have to make sure that the lines going up will line up evenly with the boards that are going to be up top. As you can see here, I've already done some caulking and some priming in places. Make sure that there's no leak in here. I'm going to come back in a little while and I want to prime every nail that's exposed because it does create a little bit of a break in the primer when those nails are drove in. Now, it might be a little bit of overkill. Again, 10 years from now, I don't want to be out here repairing this or replacing something. I'd rather do a little bit of extra detail now to make sure I don't run into problems later. Now, I've cut out a couple of my pieces already. I'm setting up a little stop right here. What I do is I take this, I get the measurement that I want, I lay it at the angle I want, I put these clamps here, clamp them into place, and use a saw to cut the proper angle. Gives me a nice straight edge. You can see I got a real professional operation going here, probably like you will have. That's why I'm doing this, because this is my first time on this and I've learned a lot of stuff, and I don't want to show you the perfect 10-second or 5-minute video or whatever the case may be that shows you just how amazingly fast and proficient I am at this, because I'm not. That's not the way it's working here. But I am happy with my progress. Let me tell you right now, don't try to cut edges on saving a couple bucks on caulk or something like that, because it's going to come back and haunt you. All right, my next step is I'm going to let this dry for a little bit, get the 3rd piece that I need for right up there measured, cut and primed, and then I'm going to go ahead and start priming these nail holes, and hopefully by that point I can go ahead and get a little bit of black paint along the top of that. Hopefully that caulking and stuff will be dry enough to accept some paint, and that way I can get the Z-flash in place before I put the next tier of boards on top of there. The caulk is dried enough now, everywhere I put it, for me to come back and fully prime everything. So any place that I broke the seal of the primer on the original LP Smart siding, I went on ahead and primed it. Right here, see where seams go together, I made sure to seal that off fairly good now. So now I'm going to let this dry for about 20-30 minutes. Then I'm going to put some black paint on the very top up there, let it dry so I can get my Z flashing put on. Okay, I'm up here towards the top of this. And as you can see, I've painted the LP Smart Siding black over top of the primer. And I did that before I put the Z flashing on, just simply because it'd be a little bit tough to get up there and paint in behind there without getting the paint all over the Z flashing. It can be done using an edger and everything, but it's best to go ahead and do it like this. And as you can see what this Z flashing does, it creates a lip. So when the water comes down, it'll go over top of the LP Smart Siding and keep from getting in behind it. To make sure that nothing gets in behind the Z flashing, use some Tyvek tape. You just put the Z flashing up here using galvanized roofing nails. You got to use galvanized everything here. You'll pay for it later when it rusts. Now I'm about to put these last 3 panels up here. And here we are. After a long day, single-handedly working on this wall, it is complete. Hope y'all were able to gain some knowledge out of this or some insight. And I'm definitely glad to see this end of it done. And now I can start the other 3 sides. If y'all have any insight or tips, I'd love to see them in the comments. Thanks for watching.